Hello everyone, it's Spalding Space coming at you with another Star Wars Legends book review. Today the book we're going to be reviewing is Darth Bane, Dynasty of Evil. Now this is the 11th event in the Legends timeline in the third and final book in the Darth Bane Trilogy. The books preceding it starting with Darth Bane Path of Destruction, followed up by its sequel, The Rule of Two, and then concluding with Dynasty of Evil. Now, I did reviews on those two books, which I will link over here. So I highly suggest that you watch those reviews, or at least read the books, because I will be spoiling elements of those books in this review. Now, I won't be spoiling anything in this book for the first half. I'll make it very clear when I'm going to start spoiling things, because when I like to watch reviews, I like to watch them before and after I read a book. Before, to sort of see what people thought of it, and then if I should even get the book. And then after, to sort of provide an analysis, and I like to sort of see what other people thought, rather than just summarizing it. I think a lot of people just summarize books instead of actually providing, good thoughts and comments and analysis about them. So I'm going to start off by talking about, or sort of just contextualizing where we find ourselves. Now, this can contrast between the other novels. So the way the first book ends is right with the end of the Battle of Ruusan. And the way the second book starts is right at the end of the Battle of Ruusan. So they basically just go from, second to second. You can read them, and it's just very, conjoined. And then later it does a time jump. Now this book is quite different. It takes place, I think, 10 or 20 years, or some number in between there, right after the end of Rule of Two, after the Battle of Tython, and after Bane gets all the Orbalisks taking off of him, and Xana tricks the Jedi into thinking the Sith are extinct and kills Caleb and her cousin, basically. So it takes place a long time after the Rule of Two. And I think Capricorn does a great job of showing that time through Bane's age. Bane has developed tremor in his left hand, and he's getting a lot older. You can see by the way that he thinks. He's definitely a lot wiser, but physically he's slower. In the previous novel, since he had all those Orbalisks on him, he was basically just impenetrable. He was just hacking and slashing anyone who got in his way. But now he's a lot more vulnerable and a lot more reserved in his way of thinking. And so a big conflict for Bane is to find a way to make himself more useful and expand his life. So Xana, on the other hand, has also matured since the previous book. Now, I had a problem with her character at the beginning of Rule of Two when she was like 10. Her 10-year-old character I didn't really prefer because I felt like she was too sadistic to be a 10-year-old and kind of embraced Bane's teaching right off the bat. So I didn't really prefer that, and that kind of took me out of the book. But after that in Rule of Two, when she gets older, I could definitely see that. I really enjoyed her character. And continuing with Dynasty of Evil, her character is very good. I think that she's a lot more mature as well. She sort of she's overcoming the fact that she will have to one day try and attempt to slay Bane for the mantle of becoming the Dark Lord of the Sith, and trying to find her own, apprentice, and very interesting. I really enjoyed her character. And I'm going to sort of mention something here, is that since this is a trilogy, and we have seen Bane throughout all three books, from Dez as a minor on Apatros, to becoming a Sith trainee, to then becoming a Academy acolyte, to becoming a Sith Lord, to becoming the Dark Lord of the Sith, to becoming Rey's teacher or Xana's instructor, and then becoming, this sort of old and pensive Bane. There's a lot of character development there, and he had the benefit of going through 3 different books. The new characters, unfortunately, don't. But Capricorn does a pretty good job of introducing the new characters. There are 4 more characters that I have yet to mention who are, they serve as narrators throughout the book. 3 of them are very good. 1 of them is not very good. The one that I didn't like is the Huntress, which I will get more to in the spoiler section. But without spoiling anything, she just isn't written that well. She's very cliche. She's very she's not that great of a character. She doesn't really have that much depth. I didn't really connect with her. On the other hand, the new character, the other character that I really like that kind of contrasts her is Set. I really enjoyed his character. He is a Dark Jedi. That's not spoiling anything. That's sort of just right off the bat, he's a Dark Jedi. And he's very much like a smuggler. He's like a rogue. He's like Han Solo. And it's interesting to see like a sort of smugglery, roguish character also be a Jedi and also be a Dark Jedi. And I mentioned this in previous reviews, is that Caperson does a fantastic way of portraying Jedi in ways we've never seen them. So he did this with Lord Hoth. He also did this with Johan. And now he's doing it with Set. And I really enjoyed seeing that contrast, because if you've just seen the canon movies, you sort of see the Jedi in a very, very similar way. I just finished reading Plagueis actually today, and that's very close to the prequel trilogy. And again, you see him in a very, very, strict way. And the way Caperson presents the Jedi, and obviously they'd be different because there's 1,000 years separating this book from that one, is very, very, very good. And I really enjoyed seeing that perspective of a Jedi who had fallen, who was also kind of really, savvy. The other two narrators, I hesitate to mention their names because it is a bit of a spoiler, and the reason, and I'm very sensitive to spoilers, so I'm trying to be as sensitive as possible because that's how I am. I don't like to know anything about anything. So I will say this, and this is one of my favorite parts about the book, is that Caperson chose, and these two characters have been in the were introduced in the first book. And I love that, because if you don't know, and I've said this multiple times throughout my previous two reviews, but I'll say it again in case you don't know, is that when Darth Bane Path of Destruction came out, Caperson meant that to be just a standalone Legends book. But Lucasfilm, or whoever owned the rights, was like, hey, let's, can you write another book? And we're going to make this whole trilogy. And he actually was tasked with writing Rule of Two within 6 months, which is fantastic, because I really enjoyed that book. So for Caperson, and I really think that it speaks to his abilities as a writer, to take what he thought and what we thought were just one-off characters in the first book and transform them to pivotal characters within this third book is really fantastic. I thought that was amazing. So I really enjoyed that. Something else that I enjoyed is, and I don't want to spoil anything, but is that this is a very good ending. When I think about what makes an ending to a saga or a trilogy successful, I think it has to be respectful. It needs to be good, but it needs to be respectful, because if it respects the stuff that came before it, and the feelings of the fans, and the what has led up to this is respectful, then it's going to be a good ending. And it was respectful. I really enjoyed it. On a bit of an other note, I just actually finished Mass Effect 3, which, trivia, Mass Effect 1 and 2, their video games, were written by, were assisted, Caperson helped write those first two games, but he didn't write the third one, which I wish he did, because the ending was really bad. But the ending of Mass Effect 3 was just terrible. It's infamously bad, and that is a perfect example of how to not end a trilogy, and the reason why is because it didn't respect the source material, even though, it just stemmed from a great game, which was Mass Effect 2. And this had the potential of being a bad ending, and it generated a lot of controversy, but it was a great ending in my opinion, and I'll go into it later. If you haven't read the book, go ahead and do it, and then I will talk about it later, and you can hear about it. Okay, stuff I didn't like before getting into spoilers. I didn't like the Huntress, as I said before. She just, she didn't meld that well together with everything, and that drives me. A lot of her scenes I felt like were okay. I felt like she was an obstacle in the way of the story. I was like, okay, let's go. I want to get to Set. I want to get to Xana. I want to get to Bane. I really liked Bane's story, and I felt like sometimes stuff was getting in the way with her character, and I was like, come on, let's go. I want to get to Bane. The book is called Darth Bane. So, and I'm not spoiling anything, but I would like to label this section of the book called the Stone Prison section. If you've read the book, you'll know of what that section is. And it's just slow. Parts of it are really good. A lot of it is slow. And it got to a point where I was like, I got it. Let's finish the book. And it's not that it was getting long. This book's like 300 pages on the dot. It's kind of shorter compared to the other ones. And I don't mind a long book. But it just drew it out to a length that I was just like, I got it. Let's go. And I think that there were moments in the book where it was drawn out for parts that I didn't really care about, and that there were parts that were really quick that I actually cared about. So if Caperson or someone, you know, would have looked at it and said, hey, I really think that this part in Bane's story is interesting, and there could be a lot of lore to be gained, or maybe something else happened. Let's make this part longer so we spend more time with characters we like, rather than drag out things that are really just not needed. And, you know, I really didn't like that. I think that the Stone Prison section and other parts of it, especially with the Huntress involved, were just okay. But you may disagree with me, and you're free to let me know. Okay, so I think that pretty much wraps up the spoiler-free section. You should really go out and buy this book. It's fantastic. I really enjoyed it. Before reading these books, I kind of didn't really know a lot about the EU and Legends, but after reading this trilogy, it really opened my eyes to how great Star Wars Legends is. And I know that it's not canon. I know, it saddens me. But it doesn't matter at the end of the day. In my mind, it is canon. There's nothing that would really interfere with it, you know, like there's no reason it shouldn't be canon. So don't let that stop you from reading it. This is some of the best, if not the best, Star Wars content out there. So please go ahead and pick this up and give it a read. Okay, now going into the spoiler section. Let's just address the elephant in the room, the ending. It generated a lot of controversy, and it was a bit cryptic, but lucky for you, I have the answer. So if you don't know, on Drew Caperson's website, if you go under the novels section and you look for Darth Bane Dynasty of Evil, he has all his books written down there. He actually wrote the Mass Effect books, which is I'm planning to read maybe, but I want to finish Legends, but I digress. He has an article under the Dynasty of Evil page talking about what he intended to be the ending. A lot of people thought things that weren't actually his intent, so I'm going to talk about what that was, so you don't have to read it. You're free to read it as well. But let me just set the stage for the end. So obviously Bane is trying to extend his life. So he finds Darth Endedu's holocron and learns the ability of essence transfer. So taking his consciousness and his soul and putting it in another body, so he can live forever, because his physical form is deteriorating because of the obelisks and the power of the dark side, and he's just getting old. So he and Xana eventually have a conflict, which, you know, you kind of know going into it, like, yeah, they're gonna fight, and one of them's gonna live or die. And eventually she cuts off his arm using sorcery, and it's super cool, and he decides, all right, essence transfer, here we go. This is it, make or break moment. And then there's like a huge explosion, and Xana steps up and says, I am Darth Xana, Darth Lord of the Sith. So I'm reading, and I'm like, all right, I guess Xana won. Cool. And then, as I mentioned earlier, Darth Bane had a twitch in his, or tremor in his left hand because he was getting old. And so Xana says, I'm Darth Xana, and there's a tremor in her left hand. And that's like the last sentence in that passage. So now you're reading, and you're like, oh my gosh, is Bane actually Xana? But why is he saying that he's Xana? But that doesn't make sense, so what the heck? So that was kind of confusing. So luckily, I heard about that thing that he wrote on the website. And he explained it, and again, in a kind of cryptic way, but he said that yes, Xana did defeat Bane. There's no reason why Bane would say, I'm Xana. It doesn't make any sense. But, part of Bane went into Xana. Now, this is where he was cryptic. He said, I don't know how much of Bane went into Xana. He said he'd refused to reveal how much, but Xana killed Bane. Now, some people may be upset about that. Bane's one of my favorite characters. But this is the way that Bane, honestly, as a character, would have wanted it to end, and this is the way that it should have ended. And I'm glad that it did, because it shows that the rule of two is right. Now that there is a more powerful Sith that has ascended to the Dark Lord of the Sith sort of like, level, and it proves that the rule of two is successful, because now the Sith will get progressively stronger as the generations go on, up until Plagueis and Sidious. So, yeah, it was good. It's sad. It's sad to see a character that you really like and that you bond with over 3 novels die, but it was good. That was the ending that should have happened and did, and I'm glad that Caperson had the will to just say, yeah, he dies. And I'm glad that he did, because, you could just say, oh, actually he beats Xana and he finds another apprentice at the end, blah, blah, blah. No, it's a good ending. So I really appreciated Caperson's respect to kill a character everybody liked. Now stuff I didn't like. Darth Cognis, who is the Huntress, is just bad. She just has a bad character. Like, what? And this is my opinion, I haven't talked about this with anybody, but maybe you agree with me, is that she just was really caricature-y, didn't really have a character, very like, I'm just a dark Sith, even though I've never had any training in the Force, and like, no. The thing that you love about Bane, and the reason why he's a great character, is you see him develop through every stage of his life that I mentioned, from minor to Sith warrior, not Sith warrior, but Sith infantryman, to apprentice, to Lord, to Dark Lord of the Sith, to teacher, to mentor, to an old man. You see that, just that nice wave. And you get that with Xana too. And again, they benefit from having multiple books at their disposal. But it's just so fast for Cognis to just embrace Bane or Xana so quickly without any hesitation. And the thing is that if Set was the apprentice, I would have got it, because it makes sense. Like, they were grooming Set to be the apprentice. Like, Capuchin was making us believe it's going to be Set. Okay, I get it. And I like Set. I think he's an interesting character. I think he's very, it would have been interesting to see him as a Sith. Definitely an unconventional choice, but you could see how Xana was manipulating him to become a Sith. And it just, like, he took the holocron, he took Endedu's holocron and fled the stone prison, and then the Huntress became Darth Cognis. And if it was switched, like, the Huntress took the holocron and Set became the apprentice, I wouldn't care. That's cool. Like, I'm good with that. But the fact that Darth Cognis was just such a big character in the grand scheme of things, I just really didn't like. It left a bad taste in my mouth, because I'm glad that the mantle of the Dark Lord, or that the Dark Lord of the Sith, is going to Xana. She is awesome. She deserves it. But the fact that Cognis will then take it from her, and I just didn't like Cognis, just was like, really? But I might be splitting hairs, and you might like the Huntress. I just didn't like her. Okay, moving on to things I liked. The two characters that I mentioned that were from the previous books, I loved. So, in case you don't remember, I read these books within the span of a week. I read all three in a week, so everything was very fresh in my mind. So when Bane was a Sith sergeant in the military, he served under the Gloomwalker Squadron, and one of his snipers in his squadron was named Lucia, and they had an interaction where he took her sniper and used the Force and impressed everybody and was like a hero to his squadron, including Lucia. So Lucia comes back in this third book and is the bodyguard of Sarah. Now you might be thinking, who's Sarah? Well, Sarah is Caleb's daughter, and Caleb was the healer that Bane forced to heal him in the first and second novel. And in the first novel, he basically, threatened and tortured Sarah as a young child and forced Caleb to heal him. So it was very interesting to see Sarah seeking vengeance after Bane, and Lucia, she doesn't even know that Bane, because she knew Bane as Dez before he was a Sith, that duality of she hates Bane and she also basically loves Bane, and they're best friends, and seeing that conflict. I think that that's a really interesting plot device, and I was just turning the page to see, oh my gosh. As soon as I saw those two characters interact, I was like, yeah, this is gonna cause some tension. So I really, really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed their characters. They were well developed. And especially because those two characters, Lucia actually had lines. Sarah didn't. She just was, a little girl in the first book. To see those one-off characters and just, supposed to be a singular book come back and play such a big role in the trilogy just was great. I think it's really interesting the way that he did that, and a testament to his writing skills. So I really, really like that. Okay, I could talk about these books for hours, but I'm going to wrap it up because it's getting a little long. So I'm gonna sort of provide some closing remarks. I like to compare these books to other books in the Legends timeline. All the books that you see here, I've read. I know that's, pales in comparison to the amount of Legends book that are actually in the timeline. I'm starting Thrawn. I'm gonna plan on starting the Thrawn series next week. But I like to compare them against each other to see how they fare. They're all different writers mostly. And the way I'm going to put Bane is I'm going to eventually make a tier list so we can do this the right way. But I like to rank this book a 9.5. It was very good. Not a 10, but not a 9. there were things that held it back, but there were a lot of things that I liked. So overall, I'll give the Darth Bane Trilogy a 9.5 out of 10. Not a 10. It wasn't perfect. It's hard to get a perfect score. Maybe Thrawn will do it. I've heard that that's the best trilogy out there, but we'll see. It was very good. And 9.5 is very respectable. Compared to other books, and I said I was gonna do a whole little tier list, but it's hard to compare, say, Dynasty of Evil with Plagueis. It's just one book versus another. It's hard to do that because I would like to classify all of the Bane books as just one book. All of the trilogies as just one book. If they're set in the same timeline, like the Old Republic books, I'm not going to do that. It's just that this is Dez's story from Minor to Dark Lord of the Sith, and it has to be classified as 3 books. You can't pin each individual book against a book like Plagueis. So when I do the tier list, it will be just Bane. So yeah, that's basically all I had to say. Go out and read this book. Go out and read the Legends books. I think that they're underappreciated, and unfortunately, there's not being made anymore because they're not canon. And unfortunately, that was not a smart, decision by Disney. But it doesn't have to be canon to enjoy this literature and to accept it into that's my mental canon. So yeah, I highly recommend that you go out and read these books. It really has changed my perspective on Star Wars. I'm very well versed in the original trilogy and everything in sort of the canon realm, but I really didn't know this. I really love the Old Republic, and I highly recommend it. If you're a fan of Star Wars: The Old Republic, the MMO, or KOTOR, Knights of the Old Republic 1 and 2, the video games, or Mass Effect even, read these books. They're great. Yeah, so I'm going to be working on some more reviews of these other books just so I can work on a tier list, which will be very interesting for all the Legends books. I think a lot of people would enjoy that. So yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Have a good day.